Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let me be the second to welcome you to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Carol Looper. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees and a retired, not really, journalist. It's great to see you all here today. Today, CMC's Forum of Pundits, Press, and Politicians, Election 2018, is sponsored by Hannah News Service, the Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio. Each of our sponsors, represented here by many friends and associates, please help me thank them. If you thought last night's national media coverage of a special election in early August in Ohio was pretty intense, you should probably buckle your seatbelt and get ready for the onslaught of news, political punditry, and drama that we'll all have to endure over the next 3 months, including all of those commercials. Thankfully, we can rely on our experts today, not only to pay attention, but to help us interpret the tea leaves. Let's hear from our experts. Welcome, Democratic strategist Derrick Clay, Republican strategist Terry Casey, co-anchor at NBC4 and host of The Spectrum, Colleen Marshall, Chief Content Director at WOSU Public Media and host of Columbus on the Record, Mike Thompson, and our host, Public Affairs Editor for the Columbus Dispatch, Darrel Rowland. And Darrel, the podium is yours.
So how many of you had dread when she said 3 more months of this stuff? And how many said, yeah, that's great? Yeah, me too. A little bit of both, even though that's how I make my living here. So I'm going on 4 hours of sleep, so apologies in advance. And you can guess why I only got 4 hours of sleep, because, yeah, there was that little election last night, and looked like a cakewalk for Danny O'Connor right at the beginning when those early vote totals were in, and we had a lead of several thousand votes. But we knew that wasn't going to last. The early votes favored the Democrats. Republicans turned it out more on Election Day. So the question was, would Troy Balderson get his head above that water where Danny O'Connor had sat? And it turns out he did. Well, we think he did. 100% of the vote is in now. Troy Balderson has a 1,700 vote lead in round numbers. Some people are still not calling the race. Let's figure this out. Terry Casey, Republican strategist, is this race over? And if Troy Balderson's a winner, how did he win?
The answer is yes, he won, and I want to shout out to Darrel. He didn't pay me any money this, but I want to give you a contrast in the media. This morning at 8:02, Gayle King on CBS said there was 8,000 provisional ballots in this district still to be counted. But you could have listened to that, but it actually is wrong. If you read what Darrel and the Dispatch wrote that was on their online right now, it gives you a very good breakdown of and I hate to be so precise, but the 3,435 provisionals still to be counted. And a big chunk, 1,349, comes from Franklin County, but over 1,000 from Delaware, et cetera. And a lot of these absentees, and it's fairly normal. I was 14 years on a board of elections here in Franklin County. A lot of people, a certain number, 4 or 5%, will request an absentee ballot, and for some reason, good or bad, they don't send it back. So the reality is there's still some votes to be counted, but I don't think, as Darrel and the Dispatch's analysis shows that it's going to be much change. So 1,754 is the current margin. It might narrow, but here's a little secret about members of Congress. They don't get paid any more or any less whether they win by 1,500 votes or 55,000 votes, though members of Congress, D and R, they do like to brag to their other members about they love me more in my district because I got a bigger margin. So obviously, I think the result is going to be final, but in case you're not happy with the result now, we're going to have a rerun in November, and I got to warn you, if you thought it's safe to watch television anymore, Get in a few nights, tape record some things now, because in September and October, it's going to get even more ugly because we've got governor, U.S. Senate, all the statewide administrative offices, local offices. It's going to get uglier and worse.
And we should probably explain this whole, insiders throw around this lingo, provisional ballots and uncounted absentees, yada, yada. Uncounted absentees are those absentee ballots. They were mailed a ballot and they've been, well, they're pending now. To be counted, they have to have a postmark by Monday. They have to arrive at the elections board within 10 days. Am I right on that? Can anyone fix me up on that?
And sometimes the post office postmarks and sometimes they don't, and then there's arguments about that.
Right. And so it's not only folks here, but it's also military voters overseas, or military voters and Ohioans from the district who live overseas. They all have that same deadline. Provisional ballots, basically there's some question about whether you are eligible when you go to the poll. So they're saying, all right, we're going to give you a provisional ballot and we'll clean it up a little bit later. So those are what is outstanding. And just Terry referred to our calculations. Basically, Danny O'Connor has to win 80% of all of those to pull even. And that's 80% assuming every one of them is counted. As Terry says, not all those absentees are coming back. Not all those provisionals are going to be counted. So enough about me. Derrick Clay, and again, everyone just jump in here, but I'm going to pick on the party people. Derrick?
Yes.
Danny O'Connor apparently fell just short. Tell me why.
Well, first off, I want to thank Jane and the CMC for allowing me to be here, and all of you for coming out and supporting this. Danny O'Connor won. Whether he goes to Congress for the next 2.5 months or not, Danny O'Connor won, and let me tell you why. So this district is about 53% Republican, it's about 47% Democrat, so it's about 7% spread on that. And President Obama in 2008 won this district by about 7 percentage points over John McCain, right? And President Trump won in 2016 by about 11%. Now, in the 2012 election, when President Obama ran against Mitt Romney, Obama lost the district by 11 percentage points. But this was after the lines were drawn. This was after the new lines were drawn. So when you look at this, you know, this is obviously a gerrymandered district that goes all the way over to, you know, as far as Muskegum County and goes up to Morrow County, and so the district is all over the place. This is a very educated district. This district is, you know, 20% of the adults are 25 years or older, have a high school education. Median income is $67,000. And why am I telling you all this? Is because this district is primarily GOP, and GOP voters crossed over to vote for Danny O'Connor because they wanted to change. And the only reason why Troy Barterson was the nominee is because he got the endorsement from Pat Tiberi. So the Democrats won because Danny O'Connor now has between now and Election Day to campaign. And the voters that voted for him last night are not going to go away. They're going to vote for him again in November. And you're going to have the statewide candidates running with Cordray and of course DeWine and the other statewides that are running. But you're also going to have Sherrod Brown, who's winning the Senate district currently, with recent polls. So you're going to have a gentleman that has basically 2.5 months to go and tell his message to voters in the 12th district. So I think that that Danny O'Connor won in concept. Whether this proves that he goes to Washington for the next couple of months or not, the Democrats won because this is a district that should have clearly been Republican. This shouldn't even have been a race. So I think that over the next few months, it's going to be very interesting whether Danny wins or not.
Well, tell the rest of you, tell me, I mean, we're talking about there's a rematch, and of course the reason there's a rematch, this special election was just to fill out the remainder of Pat Tiberi's term. Pat quit effective in January after representing the district since 2001. So this is to represent the rest of his term, which, I don't know, goes into like the first week of January. In November, it's who's going to take that full 2-year term starting in January, and basically the normal congressional term. But panel, why is it going to be any different in November than it was yesterday?
Well, I think that I agree with some of what Derrick just said, that, well, right, Danny O'Connor now has another 2.5 months to tell his message, but so does Troy Balderson. And you're going to be, the real winners, let's be honest, is TV stations.
Not all of them.
Yeah. Except for the poor unpaid people down on that end of the panel.
1-866-897-9678.
Well, the DVDs for sale in the lobby afterwards.
But I think
Peter, Paul, and Mary will be on next.
I think the reason that this really was a victory for Democrats, or for O'Connor in some ways, is that if he had lost, and we all saw the polls, having them within one, the polls for once were very accurate. And when I said in a newsroom meeting yesterday, if the polls are accurate, this is going to be completely different than if those polls were as bad as they were last time around. If he had come in far below Troy Balderson, what would have happened was the national money would have dried up, because Democrats want to flip 27 seats. And what they are looking for is the seats that are vulnerable and where that's possible. And now they look at this race and they say, not only were they within a percentage point, but they had a high voter turnout for a race that's a special election. I thought it was in the 30s. Terry told me it's closer to 40% overall. For a special election, that's incredible. I've covered general elections where the turnout was 20%. So this was really, so I think the reason this is a victory for him in a way is that he now has cred. He has credibility. He's shown that his campaign has legs. And the Democrats and the outside organizations that are deciding where do we want to nationally put our money where we have a chance of it meaning something are going to look at Ohio's 12th district and say that seat is up for grabs, because it is. Troy Balderson now has the advantage of, we're going to, where everyone says it's not decided, he's probably not, I think we can agree, going to get 80% of these outstanding votes. So he has an advantage in that he's going to be shown being sworn in to Congress. He's going to have votes. He's going to be able to be an incumbent congressman now on the ballot. There's some debate, and I'd like to know what you all think about this, the statement that he made the night before the election when he was with his group of supporters in Muskingum County and passionately talking to them and saying, we don't want someone from Franklin County to represent us. That had a visceral reaction for some people in Franklin County, and you can bet you're going to be seeing that on campaign ads. You're going to be seeing that over and over again. I'm from Appalachia. I kind of understand what he was talking about. He's talking to this rural group of people, and my dad used to have this suspicion of anybody who was city. He'd say, oh, that guy's city. And I think that he was speaking to this group of people in Muskingum County and trying to say, I understand what your concerns are. But it came out, we don't want Franklin County. And I'm curious, Mike, what was your reaction when you saw that?
Well, I thought the same thing, but I'm not so quick to say it's really going to hurt him. It might help him in those outside districts. We saw Donald Trump say some outrageous things. We all said every time he said it, that's going to kill him. That does energize folks in Franklin County, particularly people who were not prone to vote for him in the first place. Mm-hmm. But I think that also could energize folks in Muskingum and Morrow, in the rural parts of Licking County and Delaware County as well. I think there are two numbers. One is, I went back and looked at the two comparable midterm elections to this one. 2006, which was 2 years after George W. Bush's second re-election, and there was a Democratic wave that year. And then 2010, which was the after Obama won and Obamacare, and there was a mini Republican wave of sorts. The general election had a turnout of about 50 to 53%. And this one was, 37, 38, 39%. So there's still 13% of the vote still out there. And that's what these folks are going to be battling for. I think their supporters are going to, if they turned out for the special, I think Colleen's right and Derrick's right, that they're going to turn out again. It's those folks who were on vacation, didn't return the absentee ballots, weren't engaged this summer, they're going to be engaged now. And how much of those voters can Troy Balderson and Danny O'Connor capture between now and November? So that's one number, 13% of the votes still out there. The other number is 3. We still have 3 more months of Donald Trump. So a lot of news is going to happen in the next 3 months. Just think about the last 3 months. We had North Korea, we had Vladimir Putin, we've got Michael Cohen's recordings. I mean, the news is just nonstop, and that will have an impact, good or bad, for either candidate on this election. Bob Mueller could exonerate Donald Trump in the next month, and that could be good news for the Republican. Bob Mueller could try to indict Donald Trump in the next month, and that could be better news for Danny O'Connor. So there's a long way to go, and this race is far from over.
The funny thing about that is I think no matter what happens to Donald Trump, there's a base of his who will think he's the victim. And if you've been to these Trump rallies, it's like otherworldly, the way the excuses and the I probably should watch how I say this, but the acceptance of whatever he says and the belief of whatever he says, and this posturing that he's the victim of Robert Mueller. And I don't think, in some ways, I think if he's indicted a month before the election, it would help Republicans, because that base would be so energized and make sure that they turn out.
Yeah. I've read that too, that if you go back historically into the 90s, after President Clinton was impeached, his support, especially among the base, went up because they were viewed as our president's being attacked. We have to band together and send in money and whatever.
One thing that I wanted to add, I think that once all of the numbers are back and we can see the different breakdowns, it's going to be interesting to see how this race broke out, because clearly there's supporters of there's Republican voters that are voting that have crossed party lines to vote for Danny O'Connor. That's the only way that he was really able to be in this race. And it could define a new voter, the voter that's the suburban voter that is a little tired of the Trump administration and some of the antics that are going on in this administration. And so it'll be very interesting to see how those numbers break out and see if suburban voters are breaking away from the president, but putting their trust into somebody else that's running in those congressional districts.
One of the things that was mentioned is how big a race is the 12th going to be this fall. This in August was kind of the last special election, and I think the number is Republicans in special elections the past year and a half have won 8 out of 9. I think that's the rough number. That's members of Congress. That's not counting the Alabama Senate race. So 8 of 9 have been won by Republicans. But what happens, the DCCC that runs campaigns for the Democrats are very smart, and they look at the list of, say, the top 70 districts in the country, and this one is in the top 70. But I think it's more around the 50th position. And if you're running that committee, what you do, you look at, okay, of the top 20 or 30 or 40, which ones are most winnable? Where do we have good candidates? Where are the other candidates at? What's the cost to win a district? Because some districts are in, like Jim Jordan's district, 4 different major media markets. This is in one, but one that's fairly expensive. So they're going to pretty pragmatically look at where's our best opportunities, and they're going to put their chips where they think they have the best chance of getting return, and the Republicans do the similar thing. So the 12th might or might not be in that top tier of the 40 or so districts.
Well, let's segue into that, what Terry just said and what Derrick just said. In some ways, I hate the day after the election, because this is when there's all this speculation and, speaking of punditry, about the great meaning of it all. One election, one vote, whatever. So, panel, what is the great meaning of it all?
It means that we're still very divided. That it just shows the angst that the current administration, which he promised to bring when he was running in 2016, has brought to the electorate and to our communities. The interest level in politics is higher now. The divisive and the nature of the politics and people, picking sides and following their tribe, it's there and it's not going away. I think that's and the fact that this is less than a 1 point margin in a heavily Republican district, I think it's a blip in time, but it just shows you that this president is very divisive.
And also mention in do-over races, and I go back to an Ohio House race, there was a guy that won in Tuscarawas and Holmes County by all of 7 votes. So last night when I was at Channel 10, sorry, Colleen, Sandy Tice was saying this is going to be close. And I said, how do you define close? Because 7 votes in an Ohio House district, smaller, but 7 votes is really, really close. Well, he was kind of called Landslide Landis, and he jokingly called himself Landslide Landis. Well, 2 years later, he won with 70% of the vote. So different elections, different turnout models, and I think a lot of what's going to drive the turnout in November is going to be the governor's race. And I'll try and think of a tactful way to say this, but nobody thinks either candidate is overhyped with charisma. And if I ask people here, what's Cordray stand on education versus DeWine, people start scratching their heads and saying, I don't know. So the governor's race will probably drive things more because that's where the biggest chunk of the money is going to be spent. So, you can look, and also to be honest, off the record, of course, there were a few errors made by the Republicans in this candidate's campaign, like in being late and screwing up doing the mailings to Republican voters to vote by mail or early. It was screwed up big time. In fact,
the absentee ballot application.
Right, the absentee the Democrats did it right and early and got early returns. The Republicans screwed it up. Well, they've got a chance to fix some of those errors, and maybe they will and maybe they won't. Danny, to his credit, did a very good campaign in a lot of the tactical kind of things. He'll probably repeat it, but again, will he have the money? Because at times in his campaign, about 3 weeks out, he was getting in $50,000 a day off of his website because he was getting so much national publicity and a lot of people nationally were contributing. So will that be replicated this fall when there's a lot of other people across the country to contribute to? So there's a lot of variables, and sometimes rematches, like in football, they come out with the same result, and sometimes it's totally different.
Well, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say two things I thought of while Mike was talking about the divisiveness. I happened to last night, one of our photographers who covered the Trump rally last week said to me, hey, I have a story you might want to put together. This guy, it turns out there's this group, these Trump people, they're like the Grateful Dead. They follow him around the country to these rallies. And I'm going, what? He said, oh, no, you got to listen to this guy. I did an interview with him. So I went back and listened to the tape, and I am putting together a story on it, that it's this group. They've made up this Trump flag. They, without permission, ran it up the flagpole at Olentangy Orange High School. And this guy has been to 37 Trump rallies. He finds out where he's going to get next, and he and this group of about 25 guys hit the road and follow him. And they fire up the crowd. And anyway, it's the story. But one of the things, then I also listened to some of the sound bites from the protesters because I wanted to be fair and get a real feel of the people who were outside Olentangy Orange. And this guy, one of the things he said was, look around you. This is a love fest. It is a love fest. And then I'm putting right after that a soundbite from one of the protesters who said, I've never seen so much hate. So there is this division where people have a completely, it's like we're in two parallel but not crossing over universes when we look at this administration. People are having completely, it's not like there's a gray area. You have completely different ideas about what is happening in Washington. And the other thing, Terry was talking about the mailers. The one thing that came out of this campaign, and I think we're going to be seeing this across the country, is voter shaming. where they're sending these mailers out and saying, your neighbors know whether or not you voted. And in some cases, they have your name on it and have your voting record. Now, not who you voted for, but whether or not you voted. And that's become this campaign tactic to try to get people to the polls by, oh, people know whether or not I'm voting, maybe I should. And that bothers me so much because people now think, there's enough of a shadow over the election system because we know people are attacking it. And now we're going to shame the voters too. So that's the other thing. And I don't know if either of your party is the one responsible for that, but I personally don't like it.
Well, Ron O'Brien, Saturday at the gym, he told me about this woman, and she came in, and she's a Democrat, and she got a similar kind of mailing. So I think both sides were doing it. Maybe the Republicans did it more, but that does bother people when they get, and it is public record, and both sides were what they call flushing the polls on Tuesday, because by state law, it's public record, and they do a 12:30 update and they do a 4 p.m. update, and then both sides go in and they punch in who has voted, and then that's fed into a central computer to match up whether they were an R or a D, and then they go out. And actually at my house, somebody knocked on the door at about 3:30, because I hadn't voted then. I didn't vote till 6:45, basically flushing the polls. And both sides did it, but it does bother people that how do they know I didn't vote, and why are they calling me?
Right. I think we're going down a very dangerous path if that continues to be the trend. You know, I've personally not seen that in my neighborhood, but that's not to say that it's not happening. Just wanted to go back quickly to the point of the ground operation with this 12th congressional district. The reason, again, why I said that Danny O'Connor won in concept is because his campaign put on one of the best showings that I've seen in my whole political career. And I've worked at the national level, I've worked at the state level, and the campaign that this young man was able to put together in a very, very short period of time was stellar. I heard that they had knocked on registered voters' doors twice. And to be able to do that, they actually had the kids out in the neighborhood that were campaigning on his behalf. And so when you have a margin that's that close, right, the ground game is everything. And I I'll bet Democrat every time when you're talking about a ground game, because Democrats really know how to take those voter lists and break them down and be able to get that one-on-one contact with the voter, and that's so important in elections.
Well, we've mentioned the president, and none of you have done what he did in a tweet and in a press release and take credit for Troy Balderson's win. Does he deserve credit for? I mean, quite clearly, Troy Balderson won big in early vote. Republicans maybe were not quite as enthused, but you bring the president in the Saturday night before the election. How much credit does Donald Trump deserve, or not, for Troy Balderson's apparent win?
Old football coach at Syracuse, he's now dead. He said, "A win is a win, and a win is a beautiful thing." And that's what Troy Balderson has, and he has momentum. And he was on stage last night he was cheering. He was celebrating victory. That will give him momentum. I think John Kasich was the reason why he pulled it out. Not necessarily Donald Trump, because I think Donald Trump is a double-edged sword. He rallies his base, but he also reminds folks who don't like him that they have to get out and vote too. Mike Pence, perhaps a little bit more beneficial to Balderson than the president was, but I think John Kasich, that ad he cut helped a lot.
And Mike stole part of what I was going to say. You got to give Trump credit on both sides, because he motivated Democrats and he motivated some Republicans, and when it's this close, there realistically are multiple different factors. But to give you an idea on turnout, Steve Stivers told me 3 weeks before the election, he felt whether the turnout was 100,000 or higher would be the pivotal point. Well, it ended up being 202,521, and it'll probably go a little higher than that, much higher than either one. So Trump definitely drove turnout on both sides of it. And again, an August special, I can't remember having anything approaching a 40% turnout. There's some governor's races statewide that don't hit 40%. So I mean, this was a huge turnout, and it was heavily D's and R's. There were some, quote, unaffiliated independent voters who voted, but not proportionally as many, because there were also people that thought, because this is August, it was something for the party people, Democrats and Republicans. A lot of voters didn't understand this was really a general election.
Yeah, but the president was Johnny come lately. And, you know, we've seen this with him before, where he'll come in, he'll swoop in, and then take credit for it. Everybody that Senator Balderson mentioned last night in his acceptance speech, he mentioned all these folks, but he didn't mention Governor Kasich. And that's the person that he really probably should have been thanking for his alleged victory, right?
I'll see who they admit in September to the House of Congress.
Well, not only that, but I mean, Congressman T-Berry, again, his endorsement of Troy Balderson really put him on the map, because nobody even knew really who Troy Balderson was, because he's a state senator from the Zanesville area. So the endorsement from Pat T-Berry and the governor, I think, were the determining factors in his alleged victory.
Before Colleen answers, we're about to the time where you get to ask the question, so go ahead and line up the mics, and it'll be your turn. But Colleen?
I just think that, I said this earlier, but I really do think that Donald Trump has his base. They aren't going anywhere else but where he tells them to go. But he also angers people. So to Terry's point, people are motivated in the opposite way. It wasn't by coincidence that he came into Delaware County, because Delaware County was one of the counties they were worried about. Delaware County is more highly educated. There's a higher income. Property taxes are higher. It has traditionally been a Republican county, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it was very close in Delaware County last night. Balderson won in Delaware County, but it was very close, and that's pretty remarkable when you consider that that was a county that gave Trump an 11-point win. I think that Derrick was right. The suburban vote is going to be very important across the country, because it's in the suburbs that people are getting Trump weary. So it's a coin flip whether or not it's a positive or a negative to have him come in and support you. And I don't think it helped that he tweeted out that day asking people to vote for Steve Stivers in the special election. Then 10 minutes later took that tweet down, then came to Delaware and blamed the media for his mistake. So I think there were a lot of jokes being made about that online, and that's the kind of stuff that you're just never sure what his impact is going to be if he's coming into your district.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to editorialize, but that did sound a lot like an LIE, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, we've got a nice lineup here. Okay, now I have to read the Metropolitan Club's disclaimer. It's basically the Alex Trebek disclaimer. Make sure your question is a formal question and not a speech. So tell your name, anything else you want us to know, ask your question. Short and sweet is always preferred, because we have 3 behind you and there's more coming.
I talk fast. Mary Ann Potter with Fahey Bank. In light of what Colleen just said about Delaware County and how that market seems to be the one that decided this election and how educated that population is, do you think if the Democrats stress the fact that Balderson only has a high school education for November, that will affect the vote?
Can I jump in on that one? If you go out and campaign that way, certain people that only have high school educations get a little insulted and irritated. And when a New York Times reporter on Monday before the election basically said Troy and the people that support him were hicks, it tends to kind of insult people. So you could use that kind of campaigning, but I think it would backfire.
I think one of the strengths of Danny O'Connor's campaign was it was largely a positive campaign. He had negative ads, and it's people supporting him did run negative ads, but the Balderson campaign was much more negative, both his campaign and the folks supporting him. I think that was successful yesterday, and I suspect that he will stick with that going forward.
As somebody from the sticks, I agree. Don't point out when people don't have an education, because people with high school educations are sometimes really smart and they're very perceptive. And even people who have degrees would find that to be insulting. I would find that to be insulting.
Yeah, I would add, in campaigns, you always want to talk to the voters. And I think that that's an art that we have lost in campaigns, is actually talking to the voters versus trying to attack your opponent. Voters want to know what you're going to do for them in their district. So if, Senator Balderson is able to convey that going into the November election, then that'll be good for him. But, if Danny O'Connor is able to do that, along with the push that he's had from this most recent election, then he may be victorious.
All right, next.
Bill Wayhoff with Steptoe and Johnson, PLC, and I appreciate the panel today. Wondered if you could just comment, each of you, on an issue, the tariff versus free trade issue, that's traditionally really been a bipartisan. Free trade has been for many years, and now we're kind of making a turn there. I was just curious, what impact do you think this is going to have on the congressional and senatorial elections this fall with the people, as far as, having the tariffs versus what we've been doing, free trade? So
Part of it, in my view, depends on what part of the state, because Sherrod Brown is somewhat like Donald Trump in supporting the tariffs, and there's parts of Ohio, including Toledo area, a lot of northeastern Ohio, where they still want the steel industry to come back. It's going to come back some, and there's opinions, but then there's a lot of parts, including central and western and southwestern Ohio, where there's a lot more internationalism, a lot more agriculture. So it partly depends what part of Ohio, and people forget Mitt Romney tried in early October of 12, when he was running for president, to really pound on the tariff issue, and it really went nowhere in Ohio because Democrats didn't believe him, and the Republicans said a little more they believe in the trade. So trade is a mixed thing because, again, you've got Sherrod Brown and Donald Trump somewhat both on the same page.
It's really tricky for Troy Balderson. He supports Donald Trump very much, and he wants that Trump vote, and he's placing the tariffs, but he represents a rural agriculture area. He's a farmer. So he has to ride that line, how much does he support Trump on trade versus the soybean farmer who's seeing his income be cut. So it's really a tricky issue for him. It looks like O'Connor's just avoiding it. He's talking Medicare, Social Security, and new leadership. That's his message, 3 things. He's not even talking trade.
Yeah, and those are all things that voters can relate to. We live in a global economy, and part of the reason why we're in this free trade versus tariff debate, and it's so prevalent in the news, is because Trump has alienated every foreign leader that we've been in contact with. So when you don't have a relationship with these folks where you can actually sit down and talk about what's unfair to the United States, and then you're not going to get far. So then you try to put these mandatory tariffs on these foreign nations, and all they're going to do is do the same, if not worse, to the United States.
I think for voters, for the most part, when you talk about international trade and the tariffs, and eyes kind of glaze over, but here's when it's going to stop glazing over, when people start losing their jobs. We're already seeing soybean farmers who are saying that they've lost $2 per bushel in some cases on some of their supplies. And just this morning I saw on CNN a plant, I think it was in Alabama, a manufacturing facility is doing massive layoffs because they can't get supplies. They can't afford supplies because of the tariffs put on them from China, where they did a lot of their raw material purchasing. So I think what's going to happen is if between now and November we see more of that, then I think it will have an impact on people's votes. I don't know what kind of an impact we'll see in Ohio by then. Some of the auto parts manufacturers in Northwest Ohio, this could be impacting them. Some of them are foreign owned. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to the job market, because it's jobs that will drive votes more than discussions of economic tariffs.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, hi. Eric Brown, now serving on the Columbus School Board. My question is about this morning's news report, the decision by my former colleagues at the Ohio Supreme Court that hold ECOT accountable for their miscounting and for the problems that have incurred and brought them down, along with affecting adversely a lot of other charters. ECOT is tied very closely to the Republicans in this state. How will this now be used in the coming several months before November? And who's going to benefit? What's the effect going to be?
Thank you. Just so everyone's up to speed, the Ohio Supreme Court decided, I think it was 4-2, since Justice DeWine had recused himself, in favor of the state in terms of this is how we're going to count ECOT's attendance or lack thereof. In other words, the state went after them because they were inflating their attendance of kids actually online and learning. So the state says, since Ohio based school funding on attendance, the state says we need a lot of money back. The Supreme Court upheld that today. Democrats have been trying mightily to make this an issue beyond Central Ohio and make it stick to people like Dave Yost, Mike DeWine, and Troy Balderson is a supporter. But will this stick in November?
Well, that's the question, whether the public cares. I hate to say it like that, but whether this is going to be an issue for the November election is whether people really connect the dots of how the folks that are running for governor, that are running for auditor, how their participation in the ECOT scandal is going to be viewed. It has been an issue for several months. We've seen everything in the newspaper about where ECOT has gone, but the issue is whether the public is going to make that a determination whether they care about that with their next leadership.
If I'm a Democrat who's putting an ad together, I am trying to make an ad that's going to make people understand why they should care.
But the confusion...
Multi-millions of dollars went unaccounted for because attendance figures, I mean, it's the education of children. If people can't be made to understand or care about that, then we have a bigger problem. It's just whether or not you package it. If you can take a 30-second spot, maybe you start by showing the Palm Beach house of the founder of ECOT and say, wonder where your tax dollars went. And then maybe people will care about it.
But the confusion
Derrick was taking notes during that.
But the confusion on this issue, the contract on ECOT was originally signed in '06.
Sorry.
And then you had a Democrat governor and attorney general and state treasurer during 4 of those initial years of ECOT. And then it was roughly 2014 when the legislature changed the law that made it tougher to go after ECOT and get them, which is ultimately what sunk them. So there's going to be finger pointing of who is asleep when, because this covers both Strickland and Cordray periods in office and Republicans in office.
Colleen just got a job offer from a Democratic strategist. I think that ECOT is part of the culture of corruption you will hear over and over again over the next few months. ECOT, payday lending, and whatever else the Democrats want to throw at Republicans. I think that's where it fits in.
All right, folks, we're about to go into the lightning round here. 4 questioners. We got about 5 minutes, so spell out your question and maybe just 1 or 2 at the most respond. If we can do this?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that as fast as I can. I'm Mary Lightbody. I am a candidate for the Ohio House of Representatives District 19, which is Northeast Franklin County. So far we've talked about the special election. You've just touched on some of the statewide elections. I'd love to have you each please share, if you would, that's my question, your insights on the down ballot races. What do you think is going to be critical for the fall races? Thank you.
We have a half hour.
I know, right?
Half a minute.
I can only speak to the Democratic side of the aisle. I think that we have a very strong down ticket candidates. When you look at Cordray and Betty Sutton, I mean, their record speaks for themselves. Kathleen Clyde is an excellent choice for Secretary of State. Treasurer Rob Richardson down in the Cincinnati area, and our auditor candidate in Zach Space, former congressperson. And these folks are from all different parts of the state. So I think that we have a strong, very strong top of the ticket, and I think that will trickle down into the down ballot races.
But I think for the voters, it's very confusing because the learning curve is huge, because most of the people, if we went around this room and said, who is Robert Sprague and Bob Richardson, who are running for state treasurer, not many people could give you any idea of who these people are and where they're coming from. So, but I still think the governor's race is going to be the more dominant, because I think there's going to be more money spent there, and it's unclear yet what is the issue going to be in the governor's race.
Thank you. Thanks, Mary. Next.
Hi, it's a good segue for me to follow Mary, actually. I'm Joanna Saul. I'm from Planned Parenthood. There's a lot of talk about a blue wave, but at Planned Parenthood, we like to talk about a pink wave. What do you see as the impact of women and women candidates like Mary on the upcoming election? Thank you.
I think it's interesting that we had all of those women who were initially running for governor, and yet we have 2 white men at the top of each ticket. But I think we're seeing more women who are getting involved, and more women who are strategically helping each other. There's that new group, the Matriots. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
I guess not.
some of you are apparently familiar with that. But I think that I think what's going to help women is other women.
My guess is a lot of the Delaware County vote for O'Connor probably was women. I don't know. We'll find out in the next few weeks. But my guess is, like that woman we talked about before we came up here, the woman who did the ad for Danny O'Connor, who said she'd voted for John Kasich twice and Donald Trump once, but she was voting for O'Connor this time. Yeah. I think they're going to be a key to this election and many more.
Yeah.
And I like to point out, having worked not just in the last year or two, but back in the 90s and others with whether it's Joanne Davidson, Betty Montgomery, the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court is a Republican woman. You look at the other women on the court, I think Republicans have done well in this state and in central Ohio with a lot of the office holders and who they've been successful in, not just recruiting them as candidates, but getting them elected.
I think women are more empowered than ever, just because of the current administration that we have, and all the slights that have been put towards women and women's movements. You saw the marches that happened right after the election. So I think that you're going to see more women running for office and getting more involved in our civic process.
And did anything ever catch on fire or go as fast as the Me Too movement?
Thanks, Joanna. Next.
Hi, I'm Diraj with Flursoft. My question is regarding what we have seen in the presidential election, a lot of news coverage about the collusion and the impact of external adversaries who are influencing our election process. Does panel feel that, and we see in the news that it is even happening as we speak, do you guys feel that our Ohio elections, especially upcoming elections, will be influenced by that in any way?
I sure hope not.
Well, one thing that's a lot of confusion, I was on the Board of Elections here in Franklin County, was on statewide Board of Voting Machine Examiners. One part of the allegation is that somehow there's a magic person, either it was Karl Rove in the basement of the White House or somebody in Russia that's manipulating the voting machines. And the good thing is that part of the election system is not subject to hacking because they're not set up with their own telecommunications and all that. But
they're not online.
No, they're not online, and most people don't realize that because they see a touch screen and they think it must be all hooked into some system. So there's lots of safeguards and protections, but on the whole issue of the media, fake news, whose stories you can believe and not, again, we need a full hour to talk about that. It's hard to do it in 10 seconds.
And we have one more question here. Let's wrap it up, and we'll get right under the buzzer here.
Hi, I'm Sandra Lopez, and I'm curious. Colleen talked about the excitement around the president and this cult following, and we think back in the last 3 years, it's a daily scandal around the president. So I'm curious, looking at 2020, who are those candidates that Democrats can be excited about and start rallying up the troops and the dollars?
You should say that, because I just had a conversation with someone where I said the Democrats better get a message and they better get a candidate. And I'm not seeing that really a cohesive candidate or a cohesive message on the national level yet for 2020. Maybe they're waiting until after the midterms, but you would think that as seemingly vulnerable as the administration is on some issues, that someone would emerge, but I don't know, maybe you have insight.
I agree, Colleen. I think that the Democratic Party was really taken off guard when President Trump got elected. I think that
I do too.
So, I think that and I'm talking about the national folks. I think that they thought that President Clinton or Hillary Clinton was going to be our president, and so now there is a little bit of head scratching that's being done, at the DNC, trying to figure out who's going to be what exactly our message is going to be, because we thought that some of the messages that would resonate with Trump doing and saying the things that he does just doesn't stick because he has his base. So, as Colleen mentioned, we are going to have a cohesive message going into 2020.
I'll look to history. 2 years before 1992, who thought Bill Clinton would be president? 2 years before 2008, who thought Barack Obama would be president? And 2 years before 2016, who thought Donald Trump would be president? I think that we have a long way to go and someone will emerge.
And I'm going to quickly second or triple. You can't beat somebody with nobody. You got to have a candidate. You got to have a message. And with all due respect to Bernie Sanders, free Medicare and free college for everybody is not really going to sell.
Real fast, yes or no? Sherrod Brown a viable candidate? Colleen?
I think he is. He says he
Derrick?
doesn't want to be, but I think he is.
Absolutely.
Gary?
I'm all for him ceding the election this year and focusing full-time on running for president.
And Michael?
If he wins by 10, yes.
All right. Folks, we're out of time, and boy, we could go along. Thank our panel with me.
Please thank our sponsors, Hannah News Service, Ohio Farm Bureau Federation, and Planned Parenthood of Greater Ohio. And please thank our speakers, Derrick Clay, Terry Casey, Colleen Marshall, Mike Thompson, and Darrel Rowland. And thanks for being here. We look forward to seeing you again.